On a freezing Christmas night in New York, a homeless black boy wearing the only coat he had, his late mother's torn sweater, saw an old man collapsed in the snow. Panicked, he rushed over and took off the last thing keeping him warm to cover the stranger, his own body shaking from the cold. He called 911 and disappeared into the dark. But the next day the old man came back, and the boy's life was changed forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. It was Christmas Eve in New York City, but there was no warmth in the air. Snow drifted silently through the steel canyons of Manhattan, blanketing streets, silencing footsteps, and swallowing the sound of life into something muted and distant. The cold wasn't just sharp, it felt personal, like it had fingers, and it gripped every exposed patch of skin with a bite that said, "You don't belong here." Down beneath the city, deep in the belly of the subway system where the snow couldn't reach but the cold still haunted the concrete, a boy sat alone on a bench that had long since stopped being a seat and had become a kind of home. His name was Malik, 12 years old, black, homeless. He had learned not to shiver. Shivering made you look weak, and weakness invited trouble. Instead, he wrapped his arms tighter around a threadbare backpack that carried his world inside, a torn comic book with pages so worn they read like whispers, a wrinkled photo of a woman with tired eyes and a beautiful smile, and a black wool sweater, too big, stretched at the neck, unraveling at the sleeves. His mother's, the only thing left of her that didn't fit into memory. He hadn't eaten since the afternoon before. His stomach felt like a locked door with someone knocking on the other side. He had counted the coins in his pocket 4 times that day. Still not enough. He wasn't surprised anymore. The train screeched by, its gust of wind rattling wrappers and cigarette butts along the platform, but Malik didn't flinch. He was used to movement, used to people coming and going, never looking down, used to being unseen. Above ground, the wind roared differently, louder, crueler. Walter Kingsley, once a name whispered in New York's marble halls and gold-lettered office doors, now just a man with a cane and a face the world no longer recognized. He walked with stiff legs, his breath visible, his wool coat expensive but insufficient against a night like this. He had been out longer than he should have. He knew it, but he couldn't stand the silence of that high-rise apartment 1 minute more. It echoed too loud, with memories, regrets, and the sound of a woman's laugh that only lived in his head now. His late wife, Evelyn, had loved Christmas. She would have had the place lit up like a Rockefeller tree. But Evelyn was gone, and his daughter hadn't called in 2 years. Walter had all the warmth money could buy, and yet none of it reached his chest. He was halfway across a slushy, empty intersection when his leg buckled. The pain shot up from his hip like a bolt. His cane slipped. The world spun, then it went sideways. Walter hit the ground hard, his cheek pressed into snow that melted and bit into his skin at the same time. He tried to move, couldn't. The cold was already seeping through his coat, whispering something dark, and for a while, no one came. Until Malik did. He had climbed up to the street, hoping for a few discarded scraps from the midnight rush. A cart, maybe. A forgotten bag of fast food. But instead he found something else. A lump in the snow. At first he thought it was trash. A pile of coats, then the pile groaned. Malik hesitated. People didn't usually stop. The rule was mind your business, stay alive, but something, maybe the way the man's hand twitched, maybe the way snow clung to his eyelashes, made Malik step closer. He saw the man's face, old, white, clearly not meant to be on the sidewalk, clearly someone who belonged somewhere. Malik looked around. Not a single person on the block. Lights in windows, but curtains drawn. The city had turned its back. Again, he glanced down at his sweater, his mother's. It had kept him alive. Nights when the wind cut through the subway vents, that sweater was his armor. It still smelled faintly of her, or maybe that was just in his head. He knelt down beside the man, touched his face, cold. Malik pulled the sweater from his back. Every thread screamed not to. Every instinct said no. But he did it anyway. He placed the sweater over the old man's chest, then without knowing why his hands were shaking, he ran toward the glowing box on the corner, a public payphone that still worked if you kicked it twice. He dialed 911 with stiff fingers, told the dispatcher where to find the man, what he looked like, gave no name, answered no questions, then hung up. Sirens echoed faintly through the night as Malik slipped into the shadows. He didn't know that he had just started something. He didn't know this night, this act, would spiral outward like ripples on a frozen pond, cracking the ice that had sealed off 2 hearts from the world. To Malik it was simple. He saw a man who needed help, and he gave the only thing he had left. Then he disappeared, thinking that was the end of it. But it wasn't. It was only the beginning. The soft rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the first sound Walter Kingsley became aware of. For a moment he thought he was still in the snow, that the cold that gripped his chest had followed him into whatever came next. But as he opened his eyes, the harsh fluorescence above reminded him that he was still here, alive. The hospital room was quiet, too clean, and it smelled of antiseptic and something artificial, maybe the flowers someone had left in a vase by the window. Except no one had. The vase was empty. A nurse walked in, young, distracted, holding a clipboard. "You're awake," she said without looking up. "That's good." Walter tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He cleared it and said, "Who brought me in?" The nurse glanced at the notes. Anonymous 911 call, male approximate age 73, found unconscious on West 84th and Riverside. Hypothermic episode, possible fall. She flipped the page, unimpressed. "You're lucky someone saw you." "I wasn't just seen," Walter said, sitting up a little. His body ached like it had been buried under stone, but his mind was beginning to sharpen. "Someone covered me with a sweater, a child's sweater. Black wool. He saved me." The nurse smiled politely and adjusted the IV line. "Sure. No, listen. It was a boy. Young. Black. Maybe 12. He knelt beside me, and Walter stopped. His voice cracked, not from strain, but from the weight of something he didn't yet understand. "He gave me his sweater, and then he vanished." The nurse made a note, but didn't respond. Walter saw the same look in her eyes he'd seen for decades in boardrooms, the kind people gave you when they were humoring you. Later that evening, his physician came in. Middle-aged, competent, and chronically overbooked. Walter told him the same story. "A black sweater, you said?" the doctor asked, checking his vitals. "Yes. Worn, stretched, probably handmade. He gave it to me like I mattered." The doctor offered a tight smile. "Well, whoever it was, they did the right thing calling 911. I suppose you could consider it a Christmas miracle, Mr. Kingsley." But Walter didn't want a miracle. He wanted the boy. In the quiet moments of recovery, Walter couldn't stop thinking about that small figure in the snow. Not just the sweater, but the hands that had placed it gently across his chest. Hands that trembled, not from fear, but from the cold. The way the boy had looked at him, not with pity, but with something else. Determination maybe. Compassion. No one believed him. And in a city like New York, people slipping through the cracks was just part of the rhythm. But Walter had never been one to let go of a thread once he found it. 3 days after being discharged, Walter stood in his penthouse apartment and stared at the folded sweater on his nightstand. The hospital staff had returned it to him after he'd insisted they keep it. He had the paramedics track it down. Black wool, faded, with a rip at the left sleeve, mended once long ago by a hand that cared. The penthouse was quiet, like always. A cathedral of polished surfaces and silent floors. Too big for one man, too full of emptiness. Walter had once filled it with parties, voices, clinking glasses. Now it felt more like a tomb with a view. He sat down in the leather chair by the window, the sweater in his lap, and made a decision. The next morning, Walter began asking around. First his building staff, concierges, doormen, drivers, then at shelters. He didn't explain everything, just asked if anyone had seen a small black boy, about 12, thin, possibly wearing second-hand clothes, no coat. At most places they shook their heads. At some they laughed, but Walter persisted. On the 5th day, a volunteer at a midtown church remembered a boy who matched the description. Said he came by sometimes, always polite, always hungry. Said he liked to sit near the stained glass and read. Walter waited. He returned the next afternoon. This time, he arrived just as a commotion was breaking out inside the hall. An older woman was shouting, holding a small loaf of bread in her hand. He was standing right by it. I turned around and it was gone. A man in a clerical collar tried to calm her. "Let's not jump to conclusions." And there, backed against the wooden pew, stood Malik, thin arms clutching his backpack, eyes wide, not with guilt, but with the resigned look of someone already used to not being believed. Walter recognized him instantly. He stepped forward. "I know this boy," Walter said, his voice louder than he expected. Everyone turned. "He saved my life." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Walter walked straight to Malik and looked him in the eyes. "It was you, wasn't it? That night, the sweater, the phone call." Malik didn't say anything, his eyes narrowed, unsure whether this was a setup, another adult with good shoes and bad intentions. Walter knelt down, slowly, painfully, so that he was level with the boy. "You could have left me there," he said, voice low, "but you didn't." Malik still didn't respond. Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the sweater, folded neatly. "I believe this belongs to you." Something shifted in Malik's expression. A flicker, surprise, pain, a memory. Walter stood and turned to the volunteers. "This boy didn't steal anything. And if anyone has a problem with that, you can take it up with me." He turned back to Malik. "I want to offer you something," he said. "Not out of charity, but because I owe you more than I can explain." Malik stared at him. "Why?" Walter paused. The words didn't come easy. "Because you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. A reason to look up again." After a moment, Malik gave a small nod, not quite agreement, but not rejection either. Walter extended his hand. And Malik slowly, cautiously, took it. That night, Malik stepped into a world he had never known. The elevator to the penthouse was silent and soft. The apartment doors opened like the entrance to another universe. Warm lights, art on the walls, furniture that cost more than anything Malik had ever owned. He didn't say much. He just looked. Walter led him to a spare room. "It's yours for now," he said. "Just until we figure out what's next." Malik dropped his bag on the floor, but he didn't sit. He stood at the window, staring out at the city below. Glittering, cold, distant. Walter watched him from the hallway. He knew this wasn't over, that this wasn't some simple act of kindness tied up in a holiday bow. This was just the beginning. 2 lives, 2 worlds, and the quiet, invisible thread that had begun to pull them together. The first night Malik slept in the penthouse, he didn't sleep at all. The bed was too soft, the sheets too clean, the silence too loud. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the weight of the room pressing down on him like snow that refused to melt. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the thermostat, every hum from the refrigerator sounded foreign, like the whispering of a house that didn't want him there. He rose before dawn, and padded across the marble floor in socks that were too big, moving like a shadow through a museum. The kitchen lights flicked on with a motion sensor and startled him. He didn't touch anything. Just stood there, looking at fruit in a glass bowl like it belonged to someone else's dream. Walter found him there, arms folded tight, standing in the cold glow of the stainless steel fridge. He didn't say anything at first. Just stepped to the coffee maker and began the ritual he had done every morning for years. The smell filled the air, warm, bitter, alive. "You hungry?" Walter asked, not looking up. Malik nodded, but didn't move. Walter placed a croissant and some orange slices on a plate and set it on the counter. "You don't have to ask." Malik took the plate, muttered a thank you, and slipped back to the room. Over the next few days, Walter tried to build a rhythm. He had the guest room cleaned, put fresh towels in the bathroom, even asked the building manager to arrange tutoring assessments. But Malik never quite settled. He moved through the apartment, like someone waiting to be told to leave. He didn't understand hot showers that never ran out. He didn't understand lights that turned on with a touch or doors that opened with a whisper. He didn't understand a world that was always warm but somehow still felt colder than the streets he'd come from. Walter noticed it. He noticed the way Malik flinched when the cleaning lady entered too fast, the way he stared too long at the pantry shelves like they might vanish. And he noticed something else, how the people around him began to shift. The concierge asked him quietly one day, "Is everything all right with the boy?" The building security left comments in their logs. "Unauthorized minor observed, near lobby at 10:43 p.m. The neighbor, A woman who hosted charity galas and wore diamonds to walk her dog, whispered in the elevator. He seems rough around the edges. Walter defended Malik, at first firmly, then less so. He began to notice how even his own staff had started to tread differently around him. Glancing at Malik's shoes, at his silence, at the color of his skin. None of them said anything outright. They didn't have to. When Malik started attending the private academy Walter had secured a late admission to, things grew more complicated. The school was impressive, modern, with glossy brochures and a mission statement about inclusion printed in gold. But from the first day, Malik felt it, the way eyes lingered on him longer than necessary, the way kids whispered in hallways with open phones and closed hearts. He wore thrift store jeans. His backpack was fraying at the corners. He didn't speak much in class, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he wasn't sure if he was allowed to raise his hand like the others. On the third Friday, a boy in his science class asked if Malik had ever slept in a real bed before. Another mimicked his accent, not that he had one, but somehow they decided he did. He ignored it. That was the rule. Keep your head down. Don't make noise. But one afternoon during recess, he saw a smaller kid being shoved against the fence by two older students. The boy, red-cheeked and skinny, was crying, his books scattered on the ground. Malik stepped in. He didn't think, he just did it. He pulled one of the bullies back by the shoulder and stood between them. "Leave him alone," he said. They laughed. One shoved Malik, he shoved back. Not hard. But hard enough. A teacher came out seconds later and saw Malik standing over the kid still on the ground. The others had already stepped back, faces innocent, stories rehearsed. By the end of the day, Malik was in the headmaster's office. A letter of suspension was typed before Walter even arrived. That afternoon, the school called Walter in, not just with concern this time, but with footage. "We want you to see this for yourself," the headmaster said, sliding a tablet across the desk. The video was shaky, pulled from a hallway camera. It showed Malik stepping between two students. One boy shoved him. Malik pushed back. Another student hit the ground, out of frame. There was no audio, no context, no bullies, no crying child, just Malik, tense, his posture defiant. To anyone watching it looked like the aggressor had a name, and that name was Malik. Walter stared at the screen. His mouth tightened. The video ended in under 30 seconds. "We've spoken to the other students," the headmaster added. "None of them report being threatened, but your foster child reacted with aggression. This isn't about background or struggle, this is about conduct." Walter left without arguing, but his chest was heavy. As he sat in the car, the image of Malik pushing that boy played again and again in his mind. He tried to make sense of it, tried to stretch the scene into something forgivable, but something else crept in, a memory. The day he had first found Malik in the church vestibule, being accused of stealing bread, the way the woman had insisted, the way Malik hadn't defended himself. He'd stood there, silent, just like he had when the school called today. Was that a pattern? Was Malik always the quiet one, when he was guilty? Walter hated the thought, but once it took root, it began to grow. Doubt had a voice now, and it whispered things he didn't want to hear. When he got home, he found Malik sitting on the windowsill, legs curled up, the city stretched out behind him like it didn't care who he was. Walter set down his coat. "I saw the video," he said, steady but cold. Malik didn't turn, didn't flinch. Walter walked closer. "I need you to tell me what happened." Still, silence. Walter's tone sharpened. "Malik, this is serious. You're being suspended. This could go on your record." Malik looked down at his knees. His voice, when it finally came, was low. "You already think you know what happened." Walter stepped back. "I'm trying to help you, but you're not making it easy." Malik didn't look up. "I didn't do anything wrong, but you won't explain. You just sit there," Walter snapped. "You act like I'm the enemy." Malik stood up slowly. "Because no matter what I say, people only see one thing." Walter shook his head. "Don't start with that. You think the whole world's against you, but sometimes it's not the world. Sometimes it's you." Malik stared at him, jaw tight, but again, no words came. And that silence, That unbearable silence pushed Walter over the edge. He raised his voice, frustrated, hurt, unsure of who he was, even mad at. "I thought I could change you, Malik. I really did, but maybe I was just being naive." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house burning slow. Malik didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He simply turned away, picked up the black sweater from the back of the chair, and walked quietly to his room. Walter stood there, watching the door close, unsure who had just broken what, or if anything could be fixed. The morning sunlight crept slowly through the tall windows of the penthouse, casting pale golden streaks across the polished wood floors, but the apartment remained frozen in stillness. Walter Kingsley stood at the threshold of Malik's room, one hand resting on the doorframe, the other trembling slightly. The silence was louder than any fight could have been. He pushed the door open. It swung without resistance. The bed was made, not neatly but carefully, like someone who had tried their best without knowing if it was good enough. The black sweater was gone, so was the backpack, so was the boy. Walter stepped inside, heart pounding harder now than when he'd climbed the subway steps the night Malik had saved his life. He moved through the room slowly, afraid of what he would or wouldn't find. On the pillow lay a photograph, worn at the edges, the corners curled. A woman stared out from it with eyes that carried too much, and a smile that gave everything. Beside it, a comic book, tattered, missing its cover, barely held together by years of rereading. And beneath them, folded with painful intention, was a single piece of lined paper. Walter unfolded it with trembling hands. "If you want, I can give the sweater back. But thank you for letting me know what it feels like to have a bed." Walter sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, his knees giving way to the weight of something far heavier than age. He stared at the words until they blurred. Shame, cold and bitter, filled his chest like the night air Malik had walked into. The boy hadn't asked for anything, and Walter had given him doubt, condescension. A roof, yes, but without the foundation of trust, it had been nothing more than another ceiling that pressed down. He had seen Malik's silence as defiance, but now, in the echo of this empty room, Walter began to understand. Malik hadn't stayed quiet because he had nothing to say. He had stayed quiet because the world had taught him that his words didn't matter. At shelters, in classrooms, in churches, everywhere he'd been, people had already made up their minds. He had been a case, a risk, a statistic, not a voice, not a person, and over time, the boy had begun to believe them. Walter stood up, his joints ached, his soul more so. He folded the letter and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, right over his heart. He wrapped his scarf tighter and left the penthouse without telling anyone where he was going. This time, he wasn't heading out as a man trying to save someone. He was walking into the city like someone hoping to be forgiven. The city didn't notice. It never did. Walter passed the deli Evelyn used to love, the corner bakery that still smelled like her laughter, the old real estate building that once bore his name in gold. None of it meant anything now. He went to the church where they had first met. No Malik, he asked the volunteers. They hadn't seen him. He rode the subway downtown, checked the 96th Street platform, the benches, the shadows, nothing. But on his second trip down, long after the rush hour had ended and the platforms had gone quiet, he saw a familiar shape curled near the vending machine at the far end of the station. Wrapped in the black sweater, knees drawn to his chest, head tucked into his arms like he was bracing for a world that never learned to be gentle, Walter approached slowly and sat down beside him on the cold concrete, without a word. The sounds of the station faded, trains came and went, but the space between them felt like forever. "I looked everywhere for you," Walter said softly. Malik didn't turn his head. "Didn't think you would." "I had to," Walter replied. "You left without saying anything." "I've left places before," Malik murmured, voice hollow. "No one ever came looking." Walter looked down. "I wasn't just looking because you disappeared. I was looking because I finally understood what I did. I treated you like a project, like you were something broken I could fix." Malik turned slightly. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "I didn't need fixing." "I know," Walter whispered. "I know that now." There was a long silence. "I didn't run because of what you said." Malik said, voice quiet but firm. "I ran because I believed it. I believed I messed it all up, that you were finally seeing the truth. You didn't mess anything up, Walter said, throat tightening. You saw that video, Malik continued. You remembered the bread at the church. You started looking at me like everyone else does. Walter blinked hard. I looked at you like a man who was afraid of being wrong. And I was. I was so afraid to be disappointed, I ended up disappointing you. Malik looked at his hands, fingers pressed into the sleeves of his sweater. You know why I don't talk much. It's not because I don't want to, it's because I learned early that talking doesn't help. When people think they already know who you are, words don't fix that, they just make you feel smaller when no one listens. He paused, swallowing hard. And the worst part is, sometimes I start to believe them too. Walter's voice broke as he spoke. I saw the best parts of you, Malik, and I still let fear win. I didn't want to be someone's second chance, Malik said. I just wanted to be someone worth keeping. Walter turned to face him fully, eyes wet. You always were. You gave me your sweater when I had nothing but cold. You didn't owe me that, but you did it anyway. And I threw your trust back at you the moment it got hard. He reached out slowly, voice shaking. I'm not here to make decisions for you. I'm here because I don't want to lose you. Not as a symbol, not as a cause, as you. Just you. Malik stared at the hand for a long time, then up into Walter's eyes. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition maybe. The kind that says you see me now. Malik reached out and took Walter's hand, not with desperation but with quiet strength. And for the first time since that snowy Christmas night, they stood side by side again. Not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people wounded and healing, daring to try again. Together they climbed the subway steps. The wind cut through the streets above like a blade, but they didn't flinch, because this time, they were not alone. The snow had begun to melt, reluctantly giving way to the soft breath of early spring. The trees in the park were still bare, their branches reaching upward like tired hands, but beneath them, the grass was waking up in patches, hesitant green in a world still unsure if it was time to let go of the cold. The sun hung low and gentle, not strong enough to warm the skin fully, but kind enough to stay. Walter Kingsley sat on the worn wooden bench near the edge of the duck pond, his cane resting across his lap, his eyes watching the slow ripples on the water's surface. Children in puffy jackets ran across the paths, tossing breadcrumbs to birds that no longer needed to scavenge through snow. A couple walked by pushing a stroller, laughing quietly. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played something soft and unhurried on a saxophone. Walter barely heard it. He was focused on the boy beside him. Malik sat with his knees pulled up slightly, arms wrapped loosely around them, the black wool sweater snug against his chest. The holes had been repaired, not by a tailor but by Walter's own shaky hands, stitches uneven but full of care. Malik hadn't asked him to fix it, he had done it on his own, one thread at a time, as if learning how to mend something much more fragile than fabric. The boy didn't speak at first, he just stared down at the folded paper in his hands, a quiet intensity in his face that was neither fear nor disbelief. It was something softer, reverence maybe, or just the quiet ache of hope that had never dared stand too tall before. Walter turned his head slightly. You going to open it? Malik glanced up, then back down at the letter. I already know what it says, he answered, but his fingers gently unfolded the paper anyway. His eyes scanned the words, and even though he didn't smile, his shoulders loosened in a way they hadn't in weeks. Walter waited. Finally, Malik exhaled and spoke, not loudly but with weight. Full scholarship, fall semester. Portfolio judged anonymously, top 3 out of 79. Walter nodded slowly, pride blooming behind his ribs like something too big for his chest. What did you submit? Malik didn't answer right away. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a sketchbook worn thin at the edges. He flipped to the middle and turned it toward Walter. The pencil lines were soft but deliberate. A snowy city street, quiet and empty. In the center, a man collapsed in the snow, his breath visible in the air. Over him, a child kneeling, wrapping something around his chest. The man's face was barely visible, but the boy, his expression was drawn with impossible care, not fear, not desperation, but something purer. I called it the snowman, Malik said. Not like the Christmas kind. Just a man in the snow. That night, I didn't think I was doing anything special. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just couldn't walk away. Walter's throat tightened. I don't think heroes ever think they're being heroes. They just do the thing no one else does. Malik didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. After a pause, he said, I'm not going back to who I was before, but I'm not trying to be someone I'm not either. If I stay, it has to be as me, not as a version you make room for. Walter nodded. Then we make room for the real you. No negotiations. Malik looked at him, brow creasing slightly. Even when I mess up, especially then, Walter said, I've messed up more in 70 years than you'll do in your next 50, and I'm still here. A laugh escaped Malik, not loud, not long, but real. He leaned back against the bench, the sunlight catching the edge of his face. For the first time, he let himself settle fully into the seat, no tension in his posture, no readiness to run. They sat that way for a while, just two figures among many in the park, nameless to strangers, but something more to each other. Walter glanced sideways. You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked past me that night? Malik shrugged. No, I only think about what would have happened if I hadn't left the sweater. Walter smiled, quietly. That sweater's a good judge of character. Malik looked down at it and adjusted the sleeve. The stitches at the elbow were clumsy, the patch at the shoulder slightly crooked, but the warmth inside it wasn't just from the wool, it was from something far rarer, from trust, from time, from someone choosing you even when it was hard. The saxophone player shifted into something slower now, almost like a lullaby, and the breeze carried the notes across the water. Walter leaned back, his eyes closed just for a moment, the sun resting on his face. Malik stayed silent, but in his hand, he gripped the letter tighter, not out of fear it would vanish, but as if he was slowly convincing himself that it was truly his, and it was. He didn't owe the world an explanation for who he was or where he came from. He had told his story the only way he knew how, through lines on paper, moments of kindness, and silence that finally had a voice behind it. As the breeze shifted and the last patches of snow began to shrink against the edges of the path, the world felt for a moment soft again. Not fixed, not perfect, but human. No one had saved the other, no one had rewritten destiny, but two people had chosen to listen, and in that listening, something stronger than luck had formed between them. Something that even the cold could not undo.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.